Shadow. Time to go home. We all stood there in stunned silence. I looked up and saw through my tears that there was a blackbird singing from the top of the barbed wire fence, the double rainbow still there arching through the sky. It was almost as if both were mocking us. The police officer hadn't finished. So now you know, he said, which means that there's no point in hanging around here anymore. It's all over. So now let's all go home before we catch our death. Let's break this up. Come on now, time to go home. I don't think I would have actually cried had I not heard the sound of sobbing from among the football team standing behind me. My eyes and my heart welled up with tears then. Grandpa clung to my arm and held it tight. There was nothing we could say. It was over. I didn't see or hear the car coming up the road. It just seemed to be there in front of us suddenly, out of nowhere. I watched as the car doors opened, and I was wondering who it was. But I didn't really care anymore. I was that miserable. The first to get out was a young girl, about 10 or 11 years old, I thought. And then a dog jumped out after her on the lead. It was a spaniel, a brown and white spaniel, like dog, just like dog. The girl was trying to hang on to the dog at the same time as reaching in to help a man out of the back seat. As he got out and stood up, I saw that he was a soldier, in a khaki uniform and a cap. He had medals, lots of them. He was walking with a stick and gazing around him strangely. I knew at once that he was looking about him like blind men do, looking without seeing. The girl was still struggling to hold on to her dog. "Grandpa," I whispered, "that's Sergeant Brody, isn't it? And that's got to be Shadow. It has to be." Everyone seemed to realize who they were by now, from Grandpa's story in the paper, I suppose, and the whole crowd began clapping. The two dogs, Shadow and Dog, were nose to nose, tails wagging wildly. "Sorry we're late," the soldier was saying. "Traffic and everything up in London took a whole lot longer than I thought it would, didn't it, Jess?" "Oh, this is Jess, my daughter. And I'm Sergeant Brody, by the way. I'm an old friend of Almond's." Shadow and Dog were sniffing each other over with squeaking excitement. For a long while, we all just stood there not knowing what to say. Then Grandpa spoke up. "I'm afraid it's too late," he said. "They've just told us here that Almond and his mother were taken away this morning. Before we got here. They're already on their way back to Afghanistan. We're all too late." Shadow was snuffling busily around my feet now. "Sorry about her," Jess said, fighting to pull her back. "Shadow goes where her nose goes. She's like that." Dog wouldn't leave Shadow alone. He thought he had found a friend for life, a fellow sniffer, a fellow wagger. "Oh, but we're not too late," said Sergeant Brody with a smile. "You obviously haven't heard the news, have you?" "What news?" I asked. "About the volcano," his daughter said, "up in Iceland. There's this huge cloud of ash up there in the sky and the planes can't fly. None of them can, not anywhere, not to Afghanistan, not to anywhere. All the airports are closed." "That's right," Sergeant Brody went on. "Better explain, I think. When Jess read me the piece in the paper this morning, I called the regiment, spoke to my commanding officer, told him the entire story, some of which he already knew, of course, and he arranged for me to go with him to London to see the minister right away. He tapped one of the medals on his chest, a silver one. This little gong they gave me, the military cross, it opens a few doors, has its uses. I always knew it was a lucky medal anyway. Plenty of the other lads deserved it as much as I did. The truth is that with my lucky medal, and without that lucky volcano, Alvin and his mother would have been long gone by now, that's for sure. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that Alvin and his mother are staying. A special case, the minister called it. When he heard me out, a very special case. And he's dead right. Almond was a good friend to us, a good friend to the regiment and to the army. Everyone should look after their friends. That's what I told the minister. He picked up the phone and stopped the deportation there and then. I've spoken to Almond and his mother myself on the phone, told them the good news. I think they were quite pleased, really. They're on their way back here right now. It took a while for all this to sink in, and then for the news to spread among the crowd. And when it did, there was a whole lot of hugging and cheering and whooping. There was a fair bit of crying, too. Everyone began singing in the rain again, although it wasn't, if you see what I'm saying. The best moment for me, for Grandpa, and for Uncle Murr and his family, for everyone in the crowd, came an hour or so later when we saw a car coming up the road toward us. We could see Almond and his mother waving to us from inside. Almond jumped out, saw Shadow, and ran over to her at once. He crouched down, put his arms around her, and held her. I was right there beside them, the football team all around, all of us together again. For several moments, no one spoke. Shadow was licking Almond all over his ear, making him giggle. He looked up at his mother then. You see, Mother, I told you she'd know me. I told you, didn't I?" Almond, said the sergeant, holding out his hand toward him. Almond stood up and took his hand. I wrote to you, Almond said quietly. You never wrote back. The sergeant was frowning, touching his forehead above his eyes with the tips of his fingers, as if he was in pain. I'm sorry, Almond, he said, but I never got it. Stuff gets lost, I suppose. What one thing and another? The trouble is, I've been in and out of hospitals quite a lot over the last few years. 15 operations in all. IED, roadside bomb, it was. The day it happened, I didn't have Shadow with me. More's the pity. It would have never happened if she'd been there. They've been trying to patch me up ever since. Got a new leg, new arm too. They work fine, but they couldn't do anything about my eyes. I haven't been able to see a thing since the day it happened. Almond took a step back, and I could see that he was noticing the sergeant's white stick for the first time. I'm sorry, he said, and I have been blaming you all this time for not writing back, even hating you for it sometimes. You couldn't have known, the sergeant told him. No one's fault, Almond. The bomb's fault, the war's fault. And anyway, we met up in the end, didn't we? Gotta look on the bright side. There's always someone worse off than yourself. That's what my gran always used to say, and she was right. It could have been a lot worse for me. For some of the lads, it was a lot worse. When they brought me back home after I was wounded, when I was in the hospital, I told Jess all about you and Shadow, and she decided to call her Shadow from then on. She couldn't be Polly to either of us anymore. Shadow's my eyes now, and that's only thanks to you, son. That was when Almond saw his mother wheeling Uncle Murr through the crowd toward us. He ran over to him at once. A moment or two later, crouching down by Uncle Murr in his wheelchair, Almond looked across at me, and I smiled. I took the silver star out of my pocket and handed it back to him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That evening, late after it was all over, we were back at Grandpa's house, the two of us, and sitting out in the garden beside Grandma's tree. I was sad, and I knew I shouldn't be. I was sad because I knew this had been the best day of my life, and that there would never be another one like it. We had fed Dog, who was lying at my feet, as usual, his head heavy on my toes. He looked sad, too, I thought, probably because he was missing his new friend. And the stars were out. They were looking down on us, and we were looking up at them. Aren't they wonderful, Matt? Grandpa said. I think stars are just wonderful, don't you? Yes, Grandpa, I replied. But if you ask me, I think volcanoes are the best. I think volcanoes are really great.